For the best part of 100 years, Woolworths was simply there, in every town, on every high street. You didn't think about it any more than you thought about the pavement. You went in for sweets, for records, for birthday cards, for school shoes, for things you hadn't planned to buy and couldn't quite resist. The staff knew your name. The floors smelled of beeswax. The pick and mix counter had white porcelain bowls from Staffordshire, each holding 7 pounds of sweets. At its peak, Woolworths employed 100,000 people and opened a new branch every 5 days. And then, in the space of 6 weeks in the winter of 2008, the whole thing came apart. This is the story of the most loved shop in Britain. What it was, how it worked, what killed it, and why people still miss it. You walked in and the smell hit you first. Of beeswax and paraffin. That was felspar, the polish they used on the wooden floors. Every Woolworths in Britain smelled the same. It didn't matter whether you were in Truro or Inverness, Swansea or Scarborough. That smell was the same. Under the pressed steel ceiling and the fluorescent strip lights, past the big red Avery scales by the entrance. A penny to weigh yourself, dispensing a little pasteboard card with your weight printed on it. And straight ahead, the counters. Mahogany with glass dividers and glass-fronted showcases underneath. Sweets on the left, stationery beyond that. Toys further back, and records if you were lucky enough to be in a branch that had them. Nothing was behind glass. Nothing was out of reach. You could pick things up, turn them over, put them back. That sounds ordinary now, but in 1909, when the first Woolworths opened on Church Street in Liverpool, it was radical. Most British shops kept their goods behind counters, brought out by assistants on request. You pointed at what you wanted and waited while someone fetched it for you. Frank Woolworth's idea was different. Pile it high, price it low, let people touch it, and the prices, nothing over 3 pence or 6 pence. Nix over 6, the staff called it. 6 pence in 1909, about 2 pounds in today's money. For that, you could buy a tin whistle, a bag of sweets, a comb, a reel of thread, a picture frame. Half the things a household needed, all under one roof, all cheap enough that you didn't have to think twice. 60,000 people tried to get through the door on that first day in Liverpool. Like the subsidiary had been incorporated in July 1909 with share capital of 50,000, 250 pounds, the only investment the American parent ever made. Whatever happened next, the British operation would have to pay for itself. It did. Behind those counters stood the girls. They were almost always girls. Over 80% of the shop floor workforce were women, right through the chain's history, from 1909 to 2009. They wore maroon overalls in the 1930s, washed and starched at the company's expense, and they stood at their counter all day. Sweets, toiletries, haberdashery, hardware, biscuits, kitchenware. Each assistant knew her section. What sold, what didn't, what needed reordering, and at what rate. A good counter assistant could tell you that she'd sold 80 Mars bars this week, but only 12 last week. That the Yardley soap was slow, but the Cussons Imperial leather was flying, and that she needed 2 more outers of birthday cards before Saturday. She kept all of this in her head. We tell the stories of what Britain built and how it fell apart. If that's your thing, subscribe. More of these are coming. Now let's get back to the story. The tills didn't add up totals. You did that yourself. If a customer bought 3 items at 2 halfpenny, a reel of cotton at 4 pence, and a bar of soap at 3 pence, you worked out the sum, took the money, made the change, and moved on to the next customer. Stock counts were done in pencil, using complex fractions. 220 Mars bars in an outer of 144 was recorded as 176 144ths. Ready reckoner tables helped with pricing. All day, 5.5 days a week. 3 Saturdays a month, with an afternoon off on early closing day. The daily rhythm had a shape to it. You'd arrive before opening, fill the counters from stock trolleys wheeled up from the stockroom, check every item was priced, and prepare written orders for any lines running low. The morning was steady. Lunch breaks were staggered from 11 o'clock onwards to keep the shop properly staffed during the noon to 2 rush, the housewives doing their errands. After a brief lull in the early afternoon, the place would fill again from 3 o'clock as mothers and children poured in after school. Saturdays were relentless from opening to close. The wages weren't generous. In the 1930s, a sales assistant earned between 30 shillings and £2 a week. Learners and stockroom men got an extra pound for mobility. They could be transferred to another branch at short notice. By the 1960s, a full-time assistant earned about £6 for a 40-hour week, roughly 15 pence an hour. Under 16s got a learner's rate of just 7 pence. A deputy manager could earn £25, about 4 times a sales assistant's wage. For context, the average British weekly wage in the mid-1960s was 15 to 20 pounds, so Woolworths was paying its shop floor well below that. A Saturday girl in the 60s might take home 13 shillings for the day. A stockroom boy in Brighton in 1973 earned £10 a week. By the 2000s, wages had settled at the national minimum wage. But there were things the money didn't capture. The company provided a hot lunch. I cooked on the premises by a staff cook. Subsidized, and in many branches genuinely good. Holiday pay and sick pay came long before the law required them. There was the staff discount, 20% off everything in the shop. A defined benefits pension scheme ran right up until the collapse. And there was something less tangible. Margaret Anderson of Southport worked at Woolworths for 50 years. She described it as one big family. The customers were your friends, she said, and you enjoyed serving them. The company treated them well. That wasn't unusual. Woolworth's staff tended to stay. The company inspired a peculiar loyalty, not because the pay was brilliant, but because the atmosphere was. A strict but benign dictatorship, someone called it. The manager ran the shop, the girls ran the counters, and the customers came back week after week because they knew what they'd find and they knew the person selling it to them. What about the men? More than 95% of managers and executives were male, even though women had run stores perfectly well throughout the Second World War. The all-male board of directors, as late as 1969, rather undermined the official line that anyone could make it from the stockroom to the boardroom, when over 80% of the workforce were female. To become a learner, a management trainee, you had to demonstrate knowledge of every product, its rate of sale and margin, and show you could command the respect of a shop floor full of women who'd been doing the job since before you were born. It was possible, but the career ladder had a glass ceiling bolted into it. For children, none of that mattered. You'd come in with your mom on a Saturday afternoon, and you'd head straight for the pick and mix. This was the defining Woolworths experience, and it deserves proper telling. Rows of white porcelain bowls made in Hanley, Staffordshire, each one holding 7 pounds of sweets. Cola bottles, shrimps and bananas, foam bananas, white chocolate mice, fried eggs, jelly beans, pear drops, Dolly mixtures, chocolate eclairs, Everton mints. You take a paper bag and a scoop, and the whole ritual, choosing, scooping, weighing, the assistant reading the scales and working out the price, was half the pleasure. The choosing took forever. Your mum standing behind you, arms folded, waiting. You picking up a scoop of foam bananas, putting half of them back, adding a few cola bottles instead, then changing your mind about the pear drops. And the first UK supplier was Barker & Dobson, whose Everton mints were among the original lines when the Liverpool store opened in November 1909, tuppence a quarter pound. Cadbury supplied the chocolate and fudge. Woolworth's own brand sweets, sold under the Milady label, included raspberry ruffles, clotted cream fudge, and butterscotch. By the turn of the 21st century, Woolworths was Europe's largest confectionery department and Cadbury's biggest single customer worldwide. And then there were the records. From 1954 to 1965, Woolworths had its own label, Embassy Records. The idea was audacious. A song hit the charts on Thursday. Embassy's session musicians recorded a cover version at a studio on New Bond Street, the whole thing done in a 3-hour session. And the records were pressed on Thursday night and on the shelves by Monday morning, at half the price of the originals, around 1,200 songs by 150 artists over 11 years. Embassy sold one in every 20 discs bought in Britain, enough to alarm the major labels, who successfully lobbied to have Embassy Records banned from the official charts. But for families who couldn't afford a full-price single, Embassy was how you heard the music. It was democratic in the way that everything at Woolworths was democratic. After Embassy folded, Woolworths switched to selling the real thing, and it turned out to be rather good at it. Through its parent company Kingfisher, Woolworths acquired Record Merchandisers, renamed Entertainment UK. By the 1990s, one in every four albums sold in Britain was sold at Woolworths. One in four. For a chain that also sold garden furniture and children's socks, that was quite something. One Birmingham counter assistant from 1967 remembered working the record department. They could play whatever records they wanted during the week, she said, so long as they played the top 20 at the weekend. Most branches also had a tea bar or restaurant. The original Liverpool store had a tea room from day one. Frank Woolworth understood that feeding people kept them in the shop longer. Photo booths stood near the entrance, cranking out passport photos and bus pass pictures for school children every August. These weren't extras. They were part of what made Woolworths a destination. Not just a shop, but a place you went. But this story can't just be about what Woolworths felt like. It has to be about how it worked. Solid because the machine behind those mahogany counters, the supply chain, the property empire, the corporate structure, is what made the whole thing possible. And it's what eventually brought it down. Frank Winfield Woolworth created the five and dime concept while working as a clerk in Watertown, New York. His first successful store opened at Lancaster, Pennsylvania in June 1879. He'd contemplated opening in Britain since 1890. He wrote in his diary that a good threepenny and sixpenny store run by a live Yankee would create a sensation. But perhaps not. He waited nearly 20 years. When he finally did it, the growth was extraordinary. One shop in 1909, 44 by 1914, 400 by 1930, 759 by 1939, a new store opening every 5 days through the 1930s, right through the Depression, when most retailers were contracting. The 1,000th branch opened at Portslade in West Sussex in May 1958. At its peak in the late 1960s, there were over 1,100 branches, 100,000 people on the payroll, an army of Saturday boys and girls on top of that, a Woolworths in virtually every town in Britain. The secret was property. William Stevenson, the first English leader of the company, made a decision that would define Woolworths for decades. Buy the buildings, don't lease them. By the mid-20th century, Woolworths owned an enormous portfolio of prime high street freeholds, the best pitches in every town center, bought cheap and appreciating year after year. The company was, in effect, a property empire that happened to sell sweets and stationery, and the buildings themselves were distinctive. Art Deco facades clad in glazed terracotta from Shaw's of Darwin, bronze frame shop fronts with curved glass corners, pressed steel ceilings stamped with the plasteel pattern. You can still spot them if you know what to look for. Ilkeston, Hartford, Ludlow, Saffron Walden, Ely, the diamond W floor tiles at the entrance, the terracotta cladding, the curved bronze frames. They're hiding behind new fascias. Poundland, B&M, Iceland. But the bones are still Woolworths. In 1931, the British arm was floated on the London Stock Exchange, underwritten by N.M. Rothschild. It was oversubscribed despite the Depression and became the second largest stock on the exchange, behind only ICI. This was no ordinary shop. This was a national institution. The store layout evolved through the decades. The first self-service branch opened at Cobham in Surrey on the 3rd of March 1955. The directors were nervous. They feared the British public would consider self-service un-British, a vulgar American import. They needn't have worried, but the old counter service system held on stubbornly. What finally killed it was decimalization in 1971. Woolworths had more than 10,000 cash registers across its branches, and it simply couldn't afford to convert them all. The switch to self-service was the cheaper option. It took 6 years to complete, an entire way of shopping. The personal counter, the assistant who knew your name, the mental arithmetic, quietly replaced by wire baskets and checkout tills. The 1950s and 1960s were the golden years. The 1959 Golden Jubilee brought record profits and an exceptional dividend. By 1964, annual profits reached £37 million. Woolworths dominated multiple markets. The largest music retailer, the market leader in pre-recorded video from 1984, the leading Christmas card seller, third in children's wear through the Ladybird brand. It pioneered cheap VHS tapes at £6.99 when rivals charged 4 times that. The Christmas television adverts became annual events, 3 minutes long, packed with celebrities. The 1977 spectacular featured Georgie Fame, Tony Blackburn, Henry Cooper, and Sir Jimmy Young. Sir Harry Seacombe dressed as Aladdin in 1979. June Whitfield and Peter Sallis starred in the Alice in Wonderland advert of 1982. The jingle, "That's the Wonder of Woolworth," written by Rod Allen of Allen, Brady and Marsh in 1975 and performed by the Winfield Brass, lodged itself in the national memory and never quite left. David Bowie, in 1976, described his look as a cross between Nijinsky and Woolworths. Everyone knew exactly what he meant. Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin worked at the Halesowen branch in the mid-60s. He called the job mind-numbing and tedious. But the point isn't which famous people passed through. The point is that the Woolworths Saturday job was a shared generational experience for millions of ordinary British teenagers. Their first pay packet, their first taste of responsibility, their first encounter with the general public at its most demanding. What made Woolworths remarkable wasn't any single product. It was the breadth, the classlessness. It was the shop where everyone went, young and old, working class and middle class, families buying school uniform, pensioners buying batteries, teenagers buying records, children buying sweets. The sheer, unremarkable, taken for granted presence of it in every town, on every high street. You didn't think about Woolworths being there any more than you thought about the pavement being there. It simply was. But there was a shadow in the story, and it's one that deserves telling honestly. On the 8th of May, 1979, fire broke out in the Manchester Piccadilly store, the largest Woolworths in Europe, 6 floors plus 2 basement levels. A damaged electrical cable ignited polyurethane foam furniture on the second floor. The fire spread with terrifying speed. 10 people died, 9 customers and 1 employee, Cyril Baldwin. A former wartime auxiliary fireman who went back into the building to try to save others. 47 were taken to hospital. There were no sprinklers. Iron security bars trapped staff behind upper floor windows. None of the 12 emergency calls to the fire service came from the store itself. They came from passers-by and neighboring businesses. The BBC Manchester studios were next door, and the tragedy was extensively filmed. It led directly to the Furniture and Furnishings Fire Safety Regulations of 1988, which mandated fire-retardant coatings on foam furniture sold in Britain. Those regulations have saved a great many lives since. Elizabeth Price's video artwork about the disaster, The Woolworths Choir of 1979, won the Turner Prize in 2012, and there was an earlier tragedy, darker still. On a Saturday lunchtime in November 1944, a V-2 rocket struck the New Crossroads store in Deptford, southeast London. The shop was packed. Rumors of a delivery of 144 tin saucepans, scarce as gold dust in wartime, had drawn extra customers. 168 people were killed, including 33 children. 24 bodies were never identified. The Woolworth chairman later noted that the casualties in this single incident exceeded all losses at Woolworth stores worldwide, including every member of staff who had fallen in battle. During the war as a whole, 26 stores were destroyed, and 326 damaged by enemy action. Memorial plaques were erected at the New Cross site in 1994 and 2009. It's an Iceland supermarket now. These aren't footnotes. They're part of the story of what Woolworths was, how deeply embedded it was in the life of the country, how crowded its stores were, how central it was to ordinary routines. People died in Woolworths because Woolworths was where people went. So what went wrong? The answer isn't one thing. It's a sequence, corporate, economic, and cultural, and each piece made the next one worse. In September 1982, a British consortium called Paternoster Stores, led by John Beckett and Geoffrey Mulcahy and backed by Charterhouse Japhet, bought the chain for £310 million. For the first time, Woolworths was British-owned. By 1989, the holding company had been renamed Kingfisher, and Woolworths sat alongside B&Q, Comet, Superdrug, and Entertainment UK. Under Kingfisher, Woolworths was modernized. Our profits hit £105 million in 1998, but Kingfisher wanted the profitable bits and not the rest. The 250 best freehold properties were sold off to fund B and Q's expansion and the Comet acquisition. More stores were lost between 1982 and 1988 than had been destroyed by enemy action during the entire Second World War. A failed 1999 merger with Asda, which chose Walmart's offer instead, pushed Kingfisher towards a decision that would prove fatal. In August 2001, Kingfisher spun Woolworths off into a separate company, Woolworths Group plc. The Woolworths Museum calls the page about this event Death by Demerger, and it's hard to argue with the title. Every remaining freehold property was sold, and Woolworths was locked into 30-year upward-only leases. And the cash, roughly £614 million, stayed with Kingfisher. Woolworths was left with 700 different landlords and an annual rent bill of £125 million. It inherited £200 million of debt and over £100 million in excess stock. Key management positions went unfilled. The company was born dying. At the same time, the competitive landscape was shifting beneath it. Tesco, Asda, and the other supermarkets were expanding aggressively into non-food, selling toys, clothes, CDs, DVDs, stationery, sweets, kitchenware. Everything Woolworths sold, the supermarkets sold too, and they had the footfall, the supply chains, and the out-of-town car parks that High Street Woolworths lacked. Poundland, with a certain dark irony. I was using Woolworth's own original concept, a single low price for everything, against it. And then came Amazon, attacking the entertainment category, which was Woolworth's most profitable department. Even in 2008, Woolworths sold more CDs, DVDs, and games than in any previous year, but the margins had become wafer thin. The BBC called Woolworths a lame duck retailer stocking monopoly boards under the same roof as screwdrivers, and the characterization, however unkind, had a grain of truth. Nobody could quite say what Woolworths was for anymore. It sold everything and specialized in nothing. Customer numbers tell the story in cold arithmetic. 7 million a week in 2002. 4.5 million in 2007. The stores made their first loss in 97 years in 2005. Like-for-like sales fell 3.5% in the 7 weeks to September 2006. By the first half of 2008, the pre-tax loss was £99.7 million. Failed strategies came and went. The big Red Book catalog, meant to rival Argos, plagued by chronic stock shortages. A pick and mix outsourced to a Swedish company called Candy King, stripping away the one thing that was uniquely, unmistakably Woolworths and making it identical to the display in every supermarket foyer in the country. A promising value range called Worth It arrived in 2007, generating £1 million or £2 a week in sales. Staff believed in it. Customers responded. It came too late. The killing blow came from the credit insurers. Atradius withdrew cover on Woolworths' suppliers, then Euler Hermes, then Co-Face. Without credit insurance, no supplier would ship goods on account. They demanded cash up front. Reserves evaporated. In July 2008, the board rejected a £50 million bid for the entire chain from Iceland founder Malcolm Walker. On the 26th of November, shares were suspended. Deloitte was appointed administrator. Staff at the head office in Marylebone learned what was happening from the BBC 6 o'clock news. Someone at the DTI had leaked the story to Robert Peston before anyone thought to tell the people who actually worked there. On the 5th of December 2008, the clearance sales began. The chain recorded its greatest ever single day's takings, £27 million. Queues round the block. 5,000 people rang in offering to buy the whole company for £1. It didn't work like that. On the 17th of December, the administrators confirmed that all 807 stores would close. There would be no rescue, no last-minute buyer. On the 6th of January 2009, the last stores shut their doors. 807 shops, 27,000 jobs. Debt at administration stood at £385 million. A 99-year-old company, gone in 6 weeks. Some 500 office and field managers were dismissed without notice within a week, told to claim statutory redundancy from the insolvency service. Store staff were kept on through Christmas following government intervention. USDAW, the shop workers union, fought for years on behalf of the workforce. They won nearly £68 million in protective awards for around 24,000 former employees. 60 days' pay each. But roughly 4,500 workers in stores with fewer than 20 staff were initially excluded on a legal technicality about the definition of an establishment. USDAW took the case all the way to the European Court of Justice and won a further £5 million. 72 members of Parliament signed an early day motion supporting the campaign. Secured creditors got all their money back. Unsecured creditors received barely 10 pence in the pound. The Woolworths Reunited website, set up by former colleagues, helped more than 4,500 people find new work. And the buildings? Graham Solt of Canny Insights tracked all 807 locations over the following 15 years. By January 2024, 4/5 were still in active retail use. The single largest occupant was Poundland, 134 former Woolworths, nearly a fifth of the total. Iceland took 71, B&M 55, nearly half-housed variety stores offering a broadly similar proposition to the one Woolworths had offered. Only 4 locations across the entire country were never reoccupied at all. Some were subdivided. Some became gyms, pubs, dental surgeries. One houses the Migration Museum. The shop went, but the space endured. The Woolworths brand itself passed through several hands. ShopDirect, owned by the Barclay brothers, bought the name and domain in February 2009 for an estimated £5 to £10 million. Woolworths.co.uk relaunched as an online-only retailer in June 2009, selling toys, children's wear, and entertainment. It was always ShopDirect's smallest brand and closed quietly in June 2015. Its traffic redirected to very.co.uk. In July 2021, the Very Group sold all Woolworths intellectual property to Woolworth GmbH. The German company descended from Woolworth's former European division, which still operates hundreds of stores on the continent. In early 2024, its chief executive told the BBC that returning to Britain was on his bucket list. Whether that happens remains to be seen. What was lost when Woolworths closed? The obvious answer is a shop, 807 of them. But the honest answer is something harder to quantify. A place where you didn't need a reason to go in. A place where nothing was too expensive and nothing was out of reach. A Saturday job for half the teenagers in Britain. Their introduction to the world of work. Their first pay packet. Their first experience of standing behind a counter and dealing with the public. A browsing culture. The slow, aimless, pleasurable experience of wandering through a shop that sold everything, with no pressure to buy and no algorithm suggesting what you might like. A meeting point, a community fixture, a tea bar with a toasted tea cake, the smell of feldspar on wood floors and pick-and-mix sweets in paper bags. What was gained? That deserves an honest answer too. The things Woolworths sold are still available, most of them cheaper and more convenient than ever. Online shopping delivers to your door. Supermarkets carry everything under one roof and then some. Specialist retailers do individual categories better than Woolworths ever did. The music industry didn't collapse because Woolworths closed. It migrated to streaming. Children's clothing is cheaper and more varied. The market did what markets do. It found more efficient ways to get goods to people. Nobody is worse off for the lack of a Woolworths, in strictly material terms. The loss is of a different kind. The pattern Woolworths set has repeated since. BHS, 88 years of trading, gone in 2016, 11,000 jobs. Debenhams, founded in 1778, closed its doors in 2021. Wilko, over 400 stores, collapsed in 2023. The causes overlap. Identity confusion, expensive leases, online competition, crippling debt, supermarket expansion into every conceivable category. But Woolworths was the first, and the public reaction was the strongest. Surveys consistently show it as the #1 retailer Britons want to see return. 2/3 say they'd like it back. 44% of 18 to 25-year-olds, people who were toddlers when it closed, say the same. In 2020, a hoax Twitter account announcing the return of Woolworths went viral within hours. It was created by a teenage student testing, as he put it, the brand loyalty of the British public. Dozens of news outlets reported it as fact before it was debunked. The hunger for it was real, even if the announcement wasn't. The Woolworths Museum, run online by former employee and historian Paul Seaton, has had more than 10 million visitors. English Heritage called it a national treasure. The company archive sits at the University of Reading Special Collections. Accounts, branch records, architects' plans, even photographs spanning a century. A blog called Woolies Buildings documents every surviving Art Deco facade across Britain. People are still looking, still noticing the bronze shop fronts and the diamond W tiles in the entrance of a building that's now a Poundland or a dental practice or a phone repair shop. The very last bag of Woolworths Pick and Mix, from the Petswood store in Kent, weighed and bagged on the final day, sold on eBay for £14,500. The money went to the retail trust. A paper bag of sweets, cola bottles, foam bananas, shrimps, fetching the price of a small car. If you want a single image that captures what Woolworths meant to people, that might be it. Not the profits, not the property portfolio, not the corporate structure. A paper bag of sweets that someone couldn't bear to eat. The question isn't really whether the closure was inevitable. Given the debt, the leases, the competition, the credit crunch, it probably was. But understanding what Woolworths was and how it worked and why it mattered to so many people for so long, that's worth something. It was the shop that belonged to everyone. And when it went, it left a gap on the high street that nothing has quite filled since. If you went to Woolworths as a customer, as a Saturday girl, as a kid dragged in by your mom, we'd love to hear about it. What do you remember? The pick and mix? The record counter? The T-bar? The smell of those wooden floors? Which branch was yours? What year? Drop it in the comments. Those memories belong to all of us.